Hi everybody, this is Johnny. I'm going to give you an overview of Literacy Planning Task 1. And let's start with what's offered by the handbook. So everything here is straight from the handbook. What do I need to think about? In Literacy Planning Task 1, you will describe your plans for the learning segment and explain how your instruction is appropriate for the students and the content you are teaching. As you develop your plans, you need to think about the following. What do your students know? What can they do? And what are they learning to do? What do you want your students to learn? What are the important understandings and core concepts you want students to develop within the learning segment? How will you use knowledge of your students' assets to inform your plans? What instructional strategies, learning tasks, and assessments will you design to support student learning and language use? How will your learning segment support students to develop and use language that deepens content understanding? How is teaching you propose supported by research and theory about how students learn? So let's go into detail now about what you need to do. Let's start off with the first one, which is you'll need to select a class. If you teach more than one class, select one focus class for this assessment. If your placement for elementary literacy has you responsible for a group rather than a whole class, plans should describe instruction for that group, a minimum of 4 students. That group will constitute the whole class for edTPA tasks 1 through 3. And if you're in California, within your edTPA you must include an English language learner, a student with an identified disability, and a student from an underserved education group. So this is all about working for one class only. You want to have a group of students that you see regularly. You want to be working with a group that you've worked with for some time because you're going to be working around literacy and you're going to be working within a learning unit, a literacy unit of study. So you want to have connections to one solid class that you know pretty well. You need to provide context information. The Elementary Literacy Context for Learning Information form is provided later in this handbook and must be submitted in a template. This form provides essential information about your students and your school or classroom. The context information you submit should be no more than 4 pages, including prompts. This is something you should do with your mentor teacher or with other folks at the school, maybe the school secretary. It's going to ask you about kids and their different kinds of needs as well. So it's a demographic survey of your classroom to give the reviewer some sense of what kind of class you're working with, age of kids, grade level, other things that matter to your teaching. You want to identify a learning segment to plan, teach, and analyze. Review the curriculum with your cooperating teacher and select a learning segment of 3 to 5 consecutive lessons. Right? And these can be within a unit of study already. It doesn't have to be the first 3 to 5 lessons of a unit, but it could be in the middle. You decide. You need to identify a central focus for the learning segment. And some examples, the central focus could be retelling, persuasive writing, and these should include an essential literacy strategy for comprehending text or composing text. So this is where you have 2 choices. You could be focused on literacy, what it means to read text, or composing text, what it means to be a writer, what it means to be writing with your students. So either reading or writing. And aside from the essential literacy strategy, you need to be focused on describing the related skills and then how you go about teaching related skills. So the related skills needed to develop and apply the strategy. So some examples here: decoding, recalling, sequencing, writing conventions, writing paragraphs in meaningful contexts. So those are some examples of related skills. Next, you need to determine the content standards and objectives. You may find this in some teacher's guide already, but you can also go to your state or California standards for English language development and find them there. And so this will affect only some of you. If your teaching replacement requires that you teach literacy embedded in another subject area, so maybe social studies or science, Your central focus must clearly address literacy, and your standards, objectives, and learning tasks must address an essential literacy strategy and skills for comprehending or composing text. Simply having students read or write while learning content in another subject area will not satisfy the requirements for the elementary literacy edTPA tasks. Next, you need to identify and plan to support language demands. Select a key language function from your learning objectives. Choose a learning task that provides opportunities for students to practice using that language function. Identify additional language demands associated with that task. Plan targeted supports that address the identified language demands, including the language function. So when you get to language demands and language function, do look in the glossary. They'll give you some ideas about what kinds of things are language functions. So retelling might be a language function. Describing might be a language function. Look into those things and find one that fits well with what you want to teach. Next, you need to write a lesson plan for each lesson in the learning segment. Your lesson plans should be detailed enough that a substitute or other teacher could understand them well enough to use them. Your lesson plans must include the following information, even if your teacher preparation program requires you to use a specific lesson plan format. So the first thing that you have to have is the state-adopted student academic content standards that are the target of student learning. And note, please include the number and text of each standard that is being addressed. If only a portion of a standard is being addressed, then only list the part of or parts that are relevant. You need to include also in your lesson plans learning objectives associated with the content standards. Include formal and informal assessments used to monitor student learning, including types of assessment and what is being assessed. And then instructional strategies and learning tasks, including what you and the students will be doing, what support diverse students need, and then instructional resources and materials used to engage students in learning. So you're painting a picture here in your lesson plans about what's happening with your kids. You should focus both on what you're doing for instruction and then what kids are also doing in response, whether they're answering questions or they're completing a worksheet or they're having a discussion. You should write about what they're doing as well. Each lesson plan must be no more than 4 pages in length. You will need to condense or excerpt lesson plans longer than 4 pages. Any explanations or rationale for decisions should be included in your literacy planning commentary and deleted from your plans. So the literacy planning commentary will follow this. This is the write-up that will follow your lesson plan. So you're just making a picture again of what's happening in your classroom. You don't have to add full descriptions about why you're choosing to do what, because that shows up in your literacy planning commentary, which is the key artifact in this task 1. And then going to that, respond to the commentary prompts listed in the literacy planning commentary section prior to teaching the learning segment. So the final things, submit your original lesson plans. If you make changes while teaching the learning segment, you may offer reflection on those changes in the literacy instruction task 2. Okay, so that's not this task. Or the third task, which is the assessment task 3 commentaries. Teaching is real. You make changes. You may be writing lesson plans, but that's not a script. Things will happen with your kids. So you just have to reflect on it and describe why you make changes while you're teaching your kids. You also need to select and submit key instructional materials needed to understand what you and the students will be doing. No more than 5 additional pages per lesson plan. The instructional materials must include such items as class handouts, assignments, slides, and interactive whiteboard images. You must also submit copies of all written assessments and/or directions for any oral or performance assessment. Submit only the blank assessment given to students. Do not submit student work samples for this task. That will happen in the second task, the instructional task. This is all about your planning. Provide citations for the source of all materials that you did not create. So, for example, published texts websites and material from other educators. List all citations by lesson number at the end of the literacy planning commentary. Note, citations do not count toward the commentary page limit. All right, I want to go back up as an overview. At the very beginning of the handbook, each one of the tasks has a description of what you need to do. So what to do, reviewing again. Select one class as a focus for this assessment. Provide context information. Identify a learning segment to plan, teach, and analyze. And remember, 3 to 5 literacy lessons altogether. Then you need to determine a central focus for your learning segment. The central focus should support students to develop an essential literacy strategy for comprehending or composing text. Remember, it's reading or writing, and related skills that directly support that strategy. Then write and submit a lesson plan for each lesson in the learning segment. Select and submit key instructional materials needed to understand what you and the students will be doing. Again, it's you and the students. Choose one language function and other language demands. That will come up a lot in your commentary. Important to understanding elementary literacy in your learning segment. Identify a learning task where students are supported to use this language. Identify both the language function that the students will be expected to use to engage in the learning task and your instructional supports for that language. Respond to commentary prompts prior to teaching the learning segment, and then submit copies of all the written assignments and/or clear directions for any oral or performance assessments from the learning segment. The last piece here is, what does this all look like? This looks like, let's make it so we can see it all. You can see there's a context for learning piece, and you can see that it's going to be no more than 4 pages. You have descriptors of what kinds of font, spacing, etc. You need to submit all your lesson plans, directions for this about how long those might be. Your instructional materials, no more than 5 pages of key instructional materials. Literacy assessment, there's no limit on this. And then the literacy planning commentary, and you can see that this is no more than 9 pages. What I've followed with is, on this, as you can see that there's a glossary. You should come to this. You can see already language demands and language functions. Do look at the glossary at the end of the handbook, and then this will help you be able to answer the commentary so much better. So this was an overview of the Literacy Planning Task 1, Planning for Literacy Instruction and Assessment. I do hope that it's been helpful.